Hello and welcome to something a little bit different. As promised in a previous short, I want to share some particular coinage that I hold very dear, which are the 3rd century crisis Antoniniani known as the Barbarous Radiates. This set of coins is original to the 3rd century mostly because it comes from the Antoniniani, which was a 3rd century invention in itself. These are, to keep it simple, imitations of the real Antoniniani. However, apart from previous coinage such as imitative denariuses or sesterci or asses or dupondi or whatever previous imitations that were made before, during, and after the 3rd century, this is a phenomenon that can be traced back to the British Isles and to the upper regions of what's modern-day France and Belgium, mostly due to the influence of the very particular and very periodic existence of the Gallic Empire, founded by Postumus in the year 260, but which existed until the 274, and the subsequent power vacuum and economic vacuum that was caused by Aurelian's conquest of the region, which eventually led to the creation of the Minimissimus and the Minimus, which we'll see right in a moment. However, this phenomenon is very significant because even though we have to imagine ourselves in a period of complete economic chaos, especially before the ascendance of Aurelian, this phenomenon of imitative Antoniniani is nothing relatively new, quote unquote new. For example, here we have a little coin of Gallienus, which was found around Spain. I'm not exactly sure where, but it was found in Spain, which shows Gallienus in a very barbaric manner. He wears the Radiate crown and he has that neckbeard that is so typical of his. But apart from that, this is an imitative Antoninianus. And on the reverse, we have something very similar. I'm not particularly sure what this coin could be or what this type could be imitating. Some others are much more obvious, but in this case I'm not fully sure what this could be. I theorize that it could be Pax and that this particular symbol on top of here could be a weird X. But to be honest, I have no particular way of telling what this particular coin could be. But in any case, we can see that compared to an Antoninianus of Gallienus, for example this one, we can see that the size is pretty different. It's much smaller, and obviously it has no silver at all, but still, it manages to keep the concept of what's an Antoninianus, what has value. And this coin, for example, it has silver, and it has some sort of intrinsic value further than you need to buy purchase goods like food or wine or stuff like that, or going to sports or to the theater. This coin, on the other hand, is much better for small transactions that could be substituted. So this coin was hoarded for its silver value. It doesn't want to focus. This coin was hoarded for its silver value, and this one was traded and was used. And much like with Gallienus, I happen to have another coin, this one of Emperor Claudius. This is a very nice little hybrid. While it does say Imperator Claudius in the obverse, in the legends, the bust is very clearly an imitative of earlier Gallienus coins, because as we know, Gallienus, especially those later ones, like for example this one, he clearly has one very noticeable attribute, which is that he has such a long neck, which would be later imitated by coins, those of Probus and his successors. But returning to this coin, we can see that it's a relative mix of both Claudius and Gallienus's attributes. So we can tell that this coin was minted during the transition as a sort of imitative emergency coin. I've been told by some experts with whom I've been sharing these coins that it could have very probably been minted in the north of Italy. I'm not fully sure. This is very hard to prove, especially because I don't really know where this coin originated, who the original seller was, and where they found it. I'm just the last owner. But, judging by the reverse, which is also the reverse is Pax Augusta, which is a type with this particular design that wasn't minted by Claudius himself. This type was minted earlier by Gallienus, so for a short time I believe that it could have been a hybrid, so like a legitimate coin or something particularly special, but apparently this is a very well made imitation of an emperor that's not as common to find. And like I've shown earlier, both this coin that I believe comes from Spain and this coin that I believe comes from Upper Italy are two relatively more obscure sources of origin for these particular coins, as we'll see as follows. Going on before going to the main coins of Tetricus and Tetricus II, which are the most common type of the Barbarous Radiates, I also wanted to show this neat little one of Victorinus of such great quality. This is a particularly good looking imitation. I hope that you can see. If I get too close, the camera doesn't like it. But I hope that you can see that the quality of the Radiate crown and the legends and the portrait in itself is really high quality, even if it's quite obvious that it's an imitation. But even then, I think it's a very nice sign that this coin was made not to necessarily substitute an Antoninianus in a time of emergency, but simply to deceive, which is a very important thesis that I intend to make with this video, which is that we can create a before and an after in the Barbarous Radiates of the 3rd century, before and after the Gallic Empire failed with the conquest of Aurelian. This coin, for example, was made to deceive, which is to be substituted for a real Antoninianus, the same way that nowadays somebody could fake a euro, not necessarily because they need more euros in circulation, but because they want to fake that that coin is a euro. On the reverse, we've got a extremely nice as well, and an extremely nice design of what I believe to be Salus. Here we have the goddess Salus sacrificing on an altar, or perhaps, now that I look at it, it could be Providentia instead, because Salus would normally have a snake coming out of the altar, but in this case it could also be Providentia, and the camera doesn't want to focus. It could also be Providentia. And now, finally, we move on to this pile over here of the many coins. These ones on the left I will leave for last, because these are of Tetricus II. But, going just with Tetricus I, the last emperor of the Gallic Empire, who reigned between 271 and 274, until he was deposed by Aurelian, we've had little coins like this. The legends very clearly read Imperator Caesar Tetricus Pius something Augustus, I would imagine. The portrait is extremely high quality, and the fact that this coin was purchased from an auction house that I am quite confident whose coins come from the East, this raises a very interesting question, which is how far did the Gallic imitations, made in Gallia, in Gaul, and in Brittany travel? I've read some academic papers regarding the finding of similar imitations like this in what's now Western Turkey and some in Syria as well, in the province of Asia and the province of Kilikia, I would say. And this coin, in my opinion, would help support the theory that these imitations, low value imitations, because, like I said, this coin has no silver at all in it. It looks good, yes. Does it have a real value? No, it's copper. The reverse does show a little bit more proof that it's a fake, quote unquote, fake imitation of a real Antoninianus. But, this is as good as they get. So, for comparison, this is a legitimate Antoninianus of Tetricus. Let me just place it on top. You can see that it's just a tiny bit smaller, which is interesting. I mean, that's what gave it away in the first place, that it was an imitation. Because just looking at it from the obverse, for an untrained eye, I would say that it would be very hard to tell. But if we move ourselves down in the ladder of quality, we get things like this, which is very funny. This is clearly some poor Gallic peasant who clearly didn't know how to write, who knew how to come up with coins like this. If the camera would please focus, this poor peasant tried their best, and you can kind of tell what he was going, or he or she was going for. You can see Imperator Caesar Eusebius Tetricus Augustus, as you can see here on the side. It doesn't have any relief. Now that I am showing it, it doesn't really have any relief, it's just flat. And on the reverse we get the reverse is quite obvious. It's Spes holding the hem of her robe. You can see here in this particular side, that's where the hem of the robe is held. But otherwise, this is this is still a pretty good imitation, I would say. This is a pretty good imitation because it fulfills most of the requirements. The bust looks like a human with a radiate crown. The legends, although obviously made by somebody who doesn't know how to read, still look like legends. Like, you can tell what they were trying to do. The reverse is visible, even if this particular part was a bit worn, or the makeshift dies weren't particularly good, but you could still tell that this is what they wanted, and that this is something made, I would say, to deceive, rather than in an emergency of a lack of coinage. There's no point in making anything this good, or making this big of an effort to just do something quickly, when you can, make something like this. These two little things, which are very, very, very funny. Look at this. These are minimissimi, which is smaller than a minimus. These are basically like 1 millimeter. They are paper thin, as you can see. There's nothing here. Literally, there's nothing here to see. But even then, you can still tell that these are imitations of the coinage of Tetricus. Like, yes, very basic. And at the end of the day, by the end of the time that these were minted, so like the end of the reign of Probus and the start of the Tetrarchy with Diocletian, which is when the situation in Gaul and in Brittany finally stabilized enough to allow the economic flow to continue. Even then, with such a little thing like this, you can see the core idea. This is an Antoninianus, or whatever is left of it, if the camera would please focus somehow. It doesn't want to. It's okay. For example, here we have another one. The camera refuses. Now there we go. Here we have another example. You can tell that it's Tetricus, you can tell that there's a person there, you can tell that there's a radiate crown, which is the mark of the Antoninianus. Does it have any value? No, absolutely not. But did people back then care about the value on the coins, or did they just want to be able to say, I will trade you this Antoninianus for a loaf of bread? Is it an Antoninianus? No. But they still got the loaf of bread. And even then, in smaller flans like this, there's still a place for good artistry. Like this coin, for example. The flan is very small, and the engraver is clearly not an expert, but you can clearly tell that there was a good effort made to actually create a proper coin. So like something good that I don't want to say deceive at this point, because like this coin would very obviously not deceive, especially with these poorly made rivers. But even then, it is my theory that there was a sort of pride to those engravers that minted these coins. There we go. I would say that this is a particularly good looking coin for an imitation. Moving on to those of Tetricus II, which I left for last because they are just so nice to look. We have, for example, this one, this coin of Tetricus as Caesar. It's very interesting because it's clearly like, I would say, re-engraved, like it was struck in this side, for example, this part of the obverse, but you can clearly tell that whoever engraved it was not very satisfied with how it looked, and they kind of tooled it a little bit to make it look a bit better. At least that's the way that I see it. And on the reverse, we've got Spes, once again holding the hem of the robe, although there's no robe to begin with. I don't think the engraver was very sure what they were doing in this case. But yeah, the legends read Spes Publica, which was one of the most common types of Tetricus II. Moving on a little bit to the worser spectrum, we've got this one, which is very funny. This is what I would say the most old Gallic looking coin that I have of these 3rd century imitations. And what's interesting about these ones is if you look back at previous centuries, especially, for example, the silver imitations of the tetradrachs of Alexander the Great that made it all the way to Gaul, you can see this type of, like, for example, the big eyes, or the idealized hairstyle, or the pointy noses. That's precisely why I call it a particularly Gallic coin. This is as local, as Gallic tribal as you could possibly get. And on the reverse, we've got this alien-looking person. I mean, the concept is obviously Virtus Augusti, the virtue of the emperor, and this is supposed to be Tetricus II, or even Tetricus I, holding a spear and a shield. I think it gets there, it gets to the point, but it's not necessarily the best. But there's options for even worse. So, for example, we've got this particularly tiny one, and how do you tell the difference between an imitation of Tetricus I and an imitation of Tetricus II? If there's no legends, for example, that say Caesar or something like that. Well, this one isn't bearded. There is no beard. There is a little break here, but there is no beard. So, it's safe to say that this is Tetricus II. And on the reverse, we've got, once again, Spes Publica. space grabbing the hem of the robe. It's a tiny one, really tiny, but in any case, it's still an imitation of an Antoninianus made during the 3rd century. That's what's so fun about them. And here we have one of a rarer one. To end this with a nice example, this is a really well-struck coin, or imitation, I would say. It feels very awkward to call these ones coins, because, yeah, they technically were, but this has no value other than, for example, for collectors nowadays like me, who really like funky-looking portraits and legends. But yes, this is a rare one because, as you can tell, there's no beard, but the legend is Augustus, which is probably a reference to those very late real Antoniniani of the Gallic Empire, where Tetricus starts being called Augustus, which are very rare. And this is a very nice find. And on the reverse, sadly, there's no point really in the camera focusing in this one, because there's nothing. Like, it's blank. Nobody struck anything on this side. But in any case, to end the video with something interesting, I wanted to do a comparison. This is, in my opinion, I would say, my largest Antoninianus. This is an Antoninianus of Emperor Gordian, who reigned between 235 and 238, and this is my smallest Antoninianus imitation, made trying to show Tetricus. It's super hard to show this one because it's like genuinely so small. I may make a little cut maybe for the miniature, but in any case, here we have one on top of the other. There we go. You can see. They are Antoniniani. I've got two Antoniniani here. Those have, technically speaking, the same worth. One has around 40% silver. This one has absolutely no silver, and it doesn't even have copper. That's why it's so small. And the quality of the engravings, there's nothing here, and there's a proper reverse here. But that was the life of an imitation. They are small, they are worthless, except to collectors like me. And I hope that you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching.